The final aspect of this discussion of performance, now that we have given a sense of the human experience of performance and the definition of performance, the final aspect is to try to narrow down to some extent exactly what this notion of the ethics of performance resembles in the history of philosophical thought, in the history of thought about the human experience. And one good way to do that is by comparing performance as a task undertaken by AI engineers to art as a task undertaken by artists, by painters, by sculptors, by musicians. So the parallel I'm drawing here is between AI engineers and art and the performance of the machine and a painting, a sculpture, a piece of music. There is somewhere in that parallel between the engineer and his or her machine and the artist and his or her painting or sculpture. I believe there's a common ground that will help us understand to some extent or delineate what this notion is of performance as a value in AI ethics. What is the excellence that is captured or can be captured by an AI machine which is serving its purpose, regardless of what that purpose is? In the history of art, we have said that there is a distinction between how the art is used and the value of the art itself. So, for example, some of the most ruthless and horrific political regimes of our time, the communist regime of Stalin, the communist regime of China, the fascist regime of Germany, each of these three have extensive and well-studied histories of supporting the arts in the name of their ideology. There is a school of fascist art, of Soviet communist art, of Chinese communist art. And in every case, there is widespread agreement that the work of those artists, the architecture of the building, the facades that are carved, the paintings that are produced with their colors and their images, there is agreement that this art stands aside and apart from the political regimes that they were made to support. There is, in other words, something in the creation of art, in its existence as it is born, that is distinct from the uses that a regime or a person may put to art. Or, as another example, of course, it's commonly known that one use of art, especially paintings and smaller sculpture, one use of these artistic artifacts is the washing or exchanging of illicit money. People buy and sell art as a way of cleansing money that may come from illicit um, activities or as a way of simply making money appear legitimately in one or another place. Art is a form of money laundering. Um, that's true, but I've heard no one argue that the fact that a piece of art has been used for money laundering somehow detracts from the artistic value of the work. That is, again, whether we are talking about the use of art by political regimes, tyrannical political regimes, or the use of art by criminals. In both cases, we see underneath an idea that art, in its excellence as art, subsists regardless of the uses to which that artistic work is placed, is put. So something like that is the parallel that is being constructed here. Again, the parallel between the artist and his or her painting or sculpture and the AI engineer and his or her algorithms and programs and AI. And we're trying to find what is it that has value. We are trying to find, just as we recognize that in the world of art, there is value in the creative act, there is value in the birth of art, and there is value in a high quality piece of art at the moment of its birth and regardless of its uses. We're trying to find whether or not that exists too in the world of artificial intelligence and AI engineering. And the argument here is that it does. There is a performance value in AI engineering, which is in some sense no different ethically from the value of creativity and art in the world of museums and advanced civilizations. So what would that value be? What does it mean to say that art has ethical value because, excuse me, that AI has ethical value because it performs? Performance, in some sense, in AI is like creativity for the artist. And there are five ways, it seems to me, of thinking about that, of ways that we can conceive AI innovation, AI performance at the highest level, AI engineering when it's going on, when it's pioneering, when it is doing well. There are five ways that we can conceive that value, which is completely independent of what the particular AI is tasked to do. Um, and the first of those is this a sensation of purity or transcendence. There's a kind of imperceptible excellence or an idealism, almost a spiritual, like a religious revelation that surrounds the birth and construction of a high performing AI tool. This would be something like perhaps the makers of ChatGPT felt at some level when all of a sudden they had fed enough data into the machine and had backpropagated enough that the way the machine worked, the way it learned language, in order for it to actually begin producing coherent sentences. There was the Google designer. His name escapes me, but he had the insane idea that the machine had consciousness. Um, I personally I reject that completely. Machines do not have consciousness. It makes no sense. Only humans' consciousness, I'm defining it here as self-consciousness, is a self-understanding of purposes. Machines don't have that. Um, so he was wrong about that. But the wonderment he felt at this tool, the performance he felt at this tool, I think that was real. And maybe that is a sense of the kind of the purity or the transcendence that exists in great AI engineering. It's something like the purity or transcendence that exists in great art, like the Mona Lisa or a painting. It's something which is uh, indescribable and imperceptible in the world, but we see it. We are transported by it. So that's the sense of transcendence that exists in painted art. It's the idea that the viewer is transported by the art in some sense outside of earthly reality. Now, perhaps there's something of that too in artificial intelligence. Perhaps that is the performance that exists when AI is following its purpose perfectly or nearly perfectly. So that's one possible idea for what this value of performance could be in AI. One problem with this idea is we are trying to explain real material things in the world by reference to immaterial or spiritual things. This is highly problematic, and it can make people feel as though we are just waving our hands and imagining things. And that criticism functions on the level of art. If you're explaining the Mona Lisa as being excellent spiritually or transcendentally, then how does that make sense? How can you say that a piece of a material object, its excellence is immaterial? Um, so there's a paradox here at the heart of this idea. Nevertheless, we have struggled with that paradox for millennia in the area of art. Perhaps we will begin to struggle with that paradox now in the area of AI. A second way to think about what the excellence is, what the essence is of the performance that has ethical value in AI engineering, is through just the idea of innovation. The value is in the creation of something which is new. It's in pure originality, or it is in the language of the computer scientists, it is in the emergence. It is in the birth of something that and we previously think only gods can produce. There is the existence in a flash of something in the world that has never been before. Is that emergence, that innovation, that originality? Perhaps that exists in some art, and perhaps that too exists in some AI tools. The purity of creativity. If so, then it may be that innovation, that sense that something exists which had not existed before, which is born from literally nothing. From nothing, something arises. Perhaps that exists in great art and also in great AI ideas and great engineering feats, in great innovation. If so, then we can say that it is the innovation itself, the innovating, let's say, in the next step, but the innovation itself here, um, which is the excellence that makes art value, that makes AI valuable. Contrarily, or rather, running in parallel with that, there's the idea that it's not the innovation, but the innovating. It's not the discovery of something new, but the discovering of something new. Um, so there's a difference here between the idea of the innovation is the idea that the brilliance and the excellence of performance in AI is a thing, it's a noun. The innovating is the idea that the performance is a verb, it's something that happens, not something you have. This is a slightly different view of a very similar understanding. So, in the case of the idea that it's innovating or it's discovering, it would be something like the idea of the traveler that we talked about previously, who buys a one-way ticket. And sometimes we say that the purpose of the ticket is the journey, not the destination. Because in some sense, the traveler doesn't know where he or she is going, right? They don't know what they're, even when they arrive at a geographic place, they don't know what they're going to find there. In some sense, when they arrive at their destination, the journey is just beginning because they are just discovering now where they have gone. Um, so in this case, we say that the value of the nomad, or the value of the one-way ticket, is not in arriving at the destination. It is in the journey to finding out what the destination, what the destination is. What is this place where I have arrived? And that discovering is a verb, not a noun. And perhaps the excellence that exists in great art is not in the art itself, but in the creating of that art. It's in the painting verb, not the painting noun. It's in the sculpting, not the sculpture. It's in the composing of the music, not the composition of the finished tune. So to an AI, we might say that the excellence is in the designing of the AI tool. It's in that moment of building. And interestingly, then, once it is finished, in some sense, that value is gone. It disappears. So it's just that spark of creation that holds the value. The innovating that we only see later as an innovative tool. But the value was worth having was what happened before we see the tool and before we see it function in the world. The value is in the act of making the tool, not in the existence of the tool. Just like we say the value of the art is in the act of painting, not in the resulting painting. So that's a slight difference. In both cases, the value that exists, what makes AI innovation worth having, excuse me, what makes AI performance worth having, is the innovation. It's just a question of whether it's the innovation itself or it's the innovating that created the innovation. Then finally, a little bit more on a more earthly level. Maybe it's none of those things. Maybe those things are too abstract. Maybe it's not the spiritual transcendence. Maybe it's not the pure emergence of something that is new. Maybe it is not the actual creating of something that it is new. Maybe again, it's much more earthly and quotidian. The value of performance of an AI tool. In that case, we might say that it's just efficiency. What makes an AI tool, what makes it, what gives it value as performance is how, again, efficiently it does its job. This is something, for example, we see in math. We tend to prize mathematical proofs. that are highly efficient. Two mathematical proofs can equally prove a conclusion, and in some practical sense, they're the same in that way. But we tend, again, to value much more highly the efficient proof. We even call it beautiful, right? An efficient mathematical proof is something that's beautiful. Maybe to that applies also to artificial intelligence. When a tool is performing well, there is something that is beautiful in its efficiency. And it's that efficiency that is the value of performance. It's that efficiency which makes innovation and performance worth having on its own, independently of what it is that the tool is doing. It only matters that it is doing at a high level. Um, Similarly, Kant talks about this too, in some sense, in terms of the value of painting. Kant says that painting should be characterized by formal characteristics of excellence, like symmetry and so on. So perhaps there's that kind of efficiency or a balance in great art too. It's not just in mathematical proofs and in AI engineering. There's a sense that we make the point clearly and directly, and as rapidly as possible. So that would be a more earthly way of talking about the value of performance. Um, we might say in that case that the problem here is that the efficiency almost seems separate from the innovation or the creation of the engineering itself. That is, if the problem with the first three explanations for the value of AI performance was that it was too abstract, too removed from human experience. The problem here is once we get the AI into human experience and we say what's important is how efficiently it solves problems, then it sounds a little bit like we're saying the AI has value because it solves problems. But that's not what we want. We don't want it to be valuable because it solves problems. Well, we want it to be valuable because of the way it performs purely and without reference to these kinds of things that it does in the world. Of course, it does need to solve problems, otherwise, it's not doing anything. But it's not the solution to the problem that matters. It's the fact that it is solving those problems efficiently. That's the performance, and that's what has value. And then finally, perhaps the most earthly way of thinking about performance as a value is simply the gratification or fulfillment of the AI designer. Um, and this view traces back to the idea of virtue ethics. Aristotle said that virtue is a skill that we acquire, and we acquire it through practice. And that acquisition and that mastery gives pleasure in and of itself. At the risk of using a trivial example, you could imagine learning golf or tennis. There is a kind of pleasure that someone has, a sense of accomplishment they feel when, after practicing and practicing and practicing, uh, they play that sport well. And of course, that could be applied to anything, to learning to dance, to learning to paint, to learning almost any skill. Um, as you practice more and more, if you improve, and finally you reach a level which feels like a strong level, like a level of excellence, there is a sense of gratification you have. Like it was all worth doing. Like I did it. I accomplished this, and I triumphed over this. I met this challenge and I succeeded. That's a very human emotion, the sense of overcoming an obstacle, the sense of triumphing, the sense of doing something as I set out to do, the sense of pure achievement, um, the sense of, again, of accomplishment. We all have felt that in learning how to do it, in learning how to do simple things, how to play sports, how to dance, how to read, how to paint. Perhaps the value that exists in AI performance is just that. And that value exists mainly then in the AI designer, right? That is the sense of accomplishment that he or she feels when his or her AI does what it is supposed to do. And presumably they feel that accomplishment, even if it does something horrible, even if it destroys the world. In this way, we might say, kind of the evil scientist, right, feels a sense of accomplishment when they invent a tool which will destroy the world, and they still feel that sense of accomplishment. They still feel that sense of triumph. Um, and gratification from having achieved their goal. Perhaps that's the performance we are talking about. Again, here, however, the problem is that this seems like it moves the idea of performance of an AI tool as a pure ethical value. It seems like it moves it down too close to just the feeling that some person has, right? A sensation that someone out in the world has. Whereas by contrast, what we're trying to do is locate this sense of performance in the AI tool itself, or as close to it as possible, right? It's not that the value is not that it makes the AI engineer feel good. The value is that the tool is doing what it is supposed to do. And it seems like that should exist independently of what the AI engineer, how the AI engineer feels. Nevertheless, going back to the beginning, we said it's extremely difficult to locate exactly what this feeling of performance is. That's true in between AI engineers and their tools, and between artists and their artistic works. It's very difficult to define exactly what that spark of creativity is. It's very difficult to explain what it is that a piece of art holds that makes it worth having, even though it was paid for by a communist Soviet regime and used to justify horrible genocides. There's still something in that art which is worth having, regardless of its uses. And again, that's what we're looking for in the AI. Even if it's put to misuse, even if it's destructive, even if it destroys humanity entirely, there's still value in it. It's still worth having. And that worth is performance. And that's what this last section has been about.